This is Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 3, The 32nd Day of Planting, Part 1 of 3. The next morning, Shin woke up, stretched, and looked at the sky. Another beautiful morning, still on the edge side of the mountains, but probably not for long. From his vantage point, he could see Thorn gesturing aggressively as he pointed up the canyon and shouted orders to Twig and Healy. Several other officers behind them shifted anxiously. No one seemed keen to follow his orders. For men who had never before stepped into the mountains, the canyon appeared steeper, rougher, and less passable every moment. Shin had a sinking feeling that unless those timid and whipped men banded together and told Thorn they wouldn't do it, they would reach the glacial valley, a mere 3 miles away, before nightfall. So he sent the thoughts, "Rebel! Rebel!" down to the nervous men, but none of them said or did anything. Stupid sheep! He sighed in frustration. They could come together and throw that ridiculous wolf into the river and turn back. Wasn't there a noble Colonel Ferrum among them? Or a deceitful Glasson? Or an ambitious Lick? No, there's not. Thorn destroys his rivals, haven't you noticed? Am I really the only one left wanting to rid the world of Lemuel Thorn? He whispered. No, you're not. But it's not up to you to do it. Look, there's already a plan. So get them up now, Thorn roared. The officers saluted, turned, and grudgingly picked their ways through the scores of prone soldiers, shouting "Up! Up!" as they went. A few headed over to the boulder field to arouse the soldiers who attempted to sleep on the rocks. Shin! He flinched and looked up. Sergeant Beavid hovered over him and cocked his head toward the general. Thorn wants you in 5 minutes. Eat your ration and get over there. You're blazing the trail. Sergeant, Shin whispered, you have to realize this is ridiculous. Thorn's going to get a lot of these soldiers killed today when they lose their footing in this canyon. And conditions around us are deteriorating rapidly. No one can dig a proper latrine, and this place is disgusting. There are too many people, and some are already getting sick. This is a disaster in the making. And for what? Justice for a wife and daughters he doesn't even care about? This isn't about saving the world, Beavid. This is about Thorn's quest for revenge, and all of us have to pay the price. Beavid squatted next to him. So what if it is? What am I supposed to do about it, huh? March up to the general and say, "Sir, can I be excused? I don't like heights." There's nothing that can be done. Is this how all the officers feel? Shin whispered conspiratorially. That they're powerless? They are. There's only one of Thorn and tens of thousands of us. Why does he have such a hold on all of you? Beavid narrowed his eyes. You should be asking that question of yourself, Shin. Why didn't you just throw yourself into that river yesterday and refuse to obey Thorn? Or let Cloudman die? He wouldn't have minded, I'm sure. Believe it or not, you're just as big a coward as the rest of us. As much as Shin wanted to debate that, he swallowed down his protestation, because one part of him had to admit he was a coward. Stupid Lemuel Thorn had him afraid, too, and confessing that left him tasting bile. Now eat, Sergeant Beavid ordered. Do your business at the tree and report to the general. The sergeant stood up to wake the rest of the security team, but the private brooded. He wasn't entirely a coward, because if he were, he would have crumpled before Thorn and told him everything about Salem and how to get there, right? Didn't Pugga once say his grandson was braver than any man he'd known? So what did truly brave men do? They waited for the right moment to spring their traps, and the right moment had to be coming up soon. Young pair, what you're wanting is more than you're able to accomplish. I'm pleased that you've rejected Thorn, who you once admired, But young pair, you can't destroy him. He'll get you first, and that's not the Creator's will for you. He has another plan besides your imminent death." "But if everyone would just rally around me," he whispered. "They won't. As much as they hate Thorn, they love their pitiful lives even more. What you want them to do is show courage in the face of opposition. When, in any of your experiences in the world, have you seen a group of people willingly do that?" He sighed. He'd never seen it. "Preserve yourself, young pair. Let the Creator work His plan. And let Mugga and your mother and father and everyone else see you again, alive." "But Pugga, what if there comes a moment that—" "No, listen to me. Lemuel Thorn is the Refuser's most important tool. You really think the Refuser will let someone like you upset his plans for destroying Salem? He knows you as well as I do, young pair. He knew you before you were born, and he knows your abilities as well as your pride." Shin rubbed his forehead, as he always did when he couldn't out-argue his grandfather. "You may think you're targeting Thorn, but in reality the Refuser is baiting you. There's a huge battle brewing already, and it's over you, boy. Don't let the Refuser tempt you into taking on Thorn. If you die now, so do many other possibilities." He deliberated for a moment, sighed, pulled out his pack, and slowly started eating his rations. He wasn't cowardly, he reminded himself. He was merely waiting until he knew better what to do. "Mother, I wanted to tell you before you saw it yourself," Pato said as he stood at his mother's door. She was in her gathering room folding a blanket. Mari paled and let the blanket drop onto her sofa. "See what, Pato?" "Thorn's army is in the canyon as of last night. Shem called for the gray-striped banner to fly this morning. He's also calling for the evacuation of Region 1 and the northernmost areas." She released a heavy sigh. "How long until Region 3 starts walking?" That was their area, the swath running through the middle of Salem. "Not until the army passes the glacial fort and starts down the canyon to Salem. By then, everyone from Regions 1 and 2 will be well on the trails to the site." "And who will be monitoring the army's progress?" Mari wondered. "The glacial fort and scouts will be overrun by then." "We have spies with horses located along the tops of the mountains. They can keep us updated as to Thorn's progress." Not long ago, Woodson and his scouts had created alternative routes to Salem, paths which only the scouts, Pato, and Shem knew about. Worried about the men that she'd helped train in lying sessions over the years, Mari asked, "Woodson and the others know when to get out?" "When Thorn reaches Salem, the scouts head for the ancient site. They've got routes across the tops of the mountains and should always be a couple hours ahead of the army. They'll get in safely," he added, seeing the concern in her eyes. "And Woodson's not 15 anymore, Mother. He's no longer that boy we met in the forest when we were coming to Salem." Mari rolled her eyes at him. "You know full well that all of you are still little boys to me. So when will you leave?" "I want you heading to the site as soon as possible," Pato told her. "Both Shem and I agree that getting you out of Salem is a priority. If Lemuel—" "That's not what I asked," Mari politely cut him off. "When will you leave?" "That's not important. What's important is that—" Mari put her finger on her son's lips. "When will you leave?" He squared his shoulders. "When would General Shin leave, Mother?" "That's what I was afraid of." Pato attempted a smile. Mari didn't even know he had the dinner smile. He looked so much like his father. "I'll make sure that all who want to leave will make it to the forest safely. Then I will make it safely too." "What about Shem?" Don't worry. He doesn't intend to face Lemuel or even let him know that he's still alive. Mari wasn't convinced. Peto put his arms around her and hugged her small frame. Remember, Guide Glee said that we would live to see the day. We'll be right up there with you before you know it. In fact, you'll be so busy trying to climb all over that ruin again, you won't even notice when the army marches into the valley below. Mari chuckled sadly. I haven't been there since our 44th anniversary. Oh, nearly 2 years now. Nor have I seen the engravings Ralph and the others have carved there of our history. See? Peto said with strained cheeriness. Lots for you to do up there. Ralph and his family will take you up there tomorrow. He can get a start on finishing our story so those who come after us centuries later can puzzle over the shapes of our words and wonder what we were trying to tell them. You'll enjoy watching him. Mari stepped away from her son. Yes, of course I will. But Peto, don't make me go just yet. I want to stay just a little longer. Peto narrowed his eyes. Mother, why? I don't know, I really don't, she fibbed. I just don't feel I should leave tomorrow. Eventually, yes, but tomorrow's too soon. You might as well just agree to going now, Peto said, folding his arms. Because if Shem hears you want to stay, he'll be over here to have it out with you. Good! He hasn't been by to visit me for days, as if he has more important matters, she sniffed haughtily. Peto smiled gently. Please, Mother, promise me one thing. What is it? That you'll consider leaving tomorrow afternoon, just to ease my mind, make me feel better. I promise I'll consider it, Peto. But you won't do it, will you? You only asked if I would consider it. Peto groaned. Ugh! Let me restate that. You can't, she smirked. You asked me to promise you one thing. You can't ask anything more. Peto closed his eyes in frustration. You must be the most aggravating woman, from the world or from Salem. Mari kissed him on his cheek. How long have you been my son, and you finally figured that out? He chuckled. Okay, after nearly 44 years of knowing you, I'm still hoping you'll become reasonable. Look, I'm only trying to keep you safe. The general wouldn't be pleased if I neglected to take care of my mother during all of this. You're not neglecting me. Worry instead about those at the arena who think they can fight Thorn. They're sending out messengers now, looking to build an army, right? He nodded drearily. She gripped his face. Trust me to make the right decisions, Peto. I'm old enough now, you know. 74 must be of age, isn't it? Yes, you're of age, but... Then, son, don't you have something better to do this morning? Go, be Rector Shin. Do what your father would do. His duty. The scouting corps was surprised to see the 2 men on horseback riding on the top of the ridge, well out of sight of the canyons. Their paths were secret, known only to a few. They were even more surprised to see who dismounted. Colonel John Afra at your service, and this is Teeman, a former scout. Afra was wearing the gray and black mottled clothing of a scout, as was his small companion. I'm here to strike fear by permission of Guide Zenas. Now, where's the best position to holler down to the glacial fort? Shin scanned the terrain ahead of him, deliberating. The first line of the army was still struggling to scale the hard, ashy slope, but soon they'd catch up. Even though he tried to explain to Thorn the importance of spacing out the soldiers as they climbed, he refused to listen. Only minutes ago, an avalanche of more than 30 soldiers slid down the mountainside, being stopped only by large boulders. It was all because the soldier in the lead had lost his footing. Shin didn't know yet what the tally of injured was from that mistake, but it wasn't the first. The first wave of soldiers hadn't hiked more than 100 feet above the river when two unsteady and overweight men tumbled down into it. One had a broken leg, the other was still unconscious. It was then that Shin realized he might be able to incapacitate a good portion of the unfortunate army before they ever reached the glacial fort. He climbed diagonally to a wide ledge above. While he had seen traces of the faint trail and had crossed it several times, no one below him recognized it for what it was. Taking the switchbacks would have been safer and less strenuous. But Shin's goal was to exhaust and unnerve the soldiers. So far, none of them questioned his judgment about climbing straight up to the summit. They assumed that's how a mountain should be climbed. "I see where you're going," Teach grunted below him, nodding to the ridge far above. "Interesting choice." "I think it's the only choice." Cloudman looked around. "How much further till we get to the top?" "We won't go all the way to the top, or summit," Shin clarified. "Just to that ridge below it. I'm guessing it'll take about another hour. Then we can walk that until we get to wherever it is we're going." Teach groaned as he pulled himself up and cleared his throat. Shin prepared himself for the comment. "You know, some think that Thorn's goal is noble, trying to liberate all those who have been held hostage by Salem." Shin continued to trudge up the steep slope in silence, grabbing brush and scrubby tree limbs to steady himself. "Some think that you should be a little more helpful, considering the good intentions of the general." He wondered what Cheech's intent was. They'd had several pointless conversations in the last hour. Apparently General Thorne wasn't impressed with the quality of information Buddy and Pal were extracting, so he was trying a new tactic. "I'm as helpful as I know how to be, Teach." "But one could be more helpful, Shin, considering that Thorne has repeatedly threatened one of your security detail if you fail." Below him, Cloudman bounced his head, oblivious that Thorne had threatened to bounce the vile head down the mountain if the private wouldn't be more cooperative. "Interesting," Shin said as he searched for better footing. "Thorne's so noble as to force us to seek out Salem, and he's so noble that he's threatening one of his own soldiers' lives to do so. Perhaps I'm not familiar with that definition of nobility. Enlighten me, Teach." He heard Teach moan below him again, maybe because of the question, or because he was smacked by another tree branch. Hopefully both. "Nobility, doing that which circumstances demand." "That's it?" "Language usage wasn't my specialty in the university." "What was your specialty?" "I specialized in it all." Shin stifled a snort. "But not language usage?" "Why bother? Everyone knows how to talk, don't they?" Shin reached for another scrubby brush. "So who decides what circumstances demand? When someone is acting in everyone's best interests and not just out of one's own selfishness." "Are you suggesting General Thorne is selfish?" Teach asked. "Yes." The scoff behind him made Shin glance down. Teach was aghast. "You actually admit that?" "I said only what you're thinking, Teach. What everyone on this hill is thinking. It'd be wiser, safer, and more productive to go to Terrap's land. If we did, after 3 days of walking and climbing, we'd be a lot further than a mere 2 miles from the fort." Teach's mouth twitched as if he agreed, but agreeing with the private wasn't his duty for the day. "So," Teach said slowly, "how does that make you feel? Thorne's pursuing this endeavor rather than the one you recommended weeks ago." Shin rolled his eyes. The question was so leading, so obvious, that any honest answer he gave could be construed to be traitorous. "How do you think I feel about it, Teach?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." You already know my answer, Teach. Just tell me your answer, Shin. Why, is this a test of my devotion to the general? Ha! Teach barked, or would have if he wasn't struggling to catch his breath. It came out more as a defiant gasp. Everyone doubts that right now, Shin. The real question is why? Why are you so critical of your father? Isn't that what sons do? He blinked innocently. Criticize and rebel against their fathers? Teach considered that. True, true. That's probably what many sons do. But they know their fathers won't kill them or their companions for it. Honestly, I don't understand you. For as evil as Salem is, you insist on shielding it? What do you fear? Are you afraid they'll harm your father? Cloudman called up. Shin wasn't aware that he was listening. Is that why you don't want the general going to Salem? Your father will get hurt? Cloudman asked in his typically chipper tone. Shin smiled. The words were all correct, but the meaning was all wrong. Yeah, something like that. Very perceptive. Cloudman beamed at the compliment. Teach nodded. Then why not tell the general that? Why not tell him you're just trying to preserve him? It's a little more confusing than that, Teach. I get confused myself nearly every minute. Stupid vile heads, Teach murmured. The first of the Salemites left early that afternoon with packs on their backs. Small children and the elderly rode on horses, while everyone else walked alongside. As they passed their friends and neighbors, also readying for the journey, they nodded apprehensively and exchanged strained smiles. Some families looked back at their colorfully painted houses, farms, gardens, and fields, but others didn't. What was the point? It wasn't as if there were any more details to memorize. By the thousands, they made their way to the southernmost route, called the Idumean Trail, because Guide Gleese had seen in vision that was the route the army of Idumea would take to the dead Western Valley, and the reason those living near it needed to be gone well before the army arrived. Rector Shin and his assistant Cephas Brighter sat on their horses at the trailhead, waiting for the families. As Cephas spot-checked packs to make sure they were all complete, unsurprisingly all of them were, Rector Shin asked everyone the same thing. You understand how to read the markings, right? The number of slashes in their direction indicates how many tens of paces you need to walk, and in one direction, until you come to the next markings. An old woman smiled and waved as she strolled by. Thank you, but rest assured that we all know what to do, General. That title always made Pato squirm. Ma'am, I'm not the general. But she wagged a finger at him, and an old man next to her said, We knew your father, Rector Shin, and you are every bit as much a general as he was. But I never served. And what have you been doing for the past 20-odd years? The old woman exclaimed. Serving us. You're our General Shin. And frankly, son, the old man added, Salem could use a general on our side right now. Don't you agree? Several people hearing the exchange chuckled in agreement. Pato could do nothing else but wink his appreciation. Once the group had passed, Cephas leaned over to his uncle. If you're a general, does that mean I'm a lieutenant? Pato chuckled miserably. Oh, my father gave me that designation when I was his assistant. The title never stuck, but you might as well be Lieutenant Brighter. Cephas sat a little taller. Their checking of packs was unnecessary. Everyone was prepared, and had been for over 25 years. Still, the Salemites appreciated the rector's show of concern and his attempt to look cheerful. But nothing could disguise the melancholy in his eyes as Salem began to evacuate. Versa examined herself in the small mirror in her bedroom. The wide breeches felt odd, as they did when she first put them on to come to Salem 5 moons ago, but they were more practical for walking and climbing. The roomy tunic, however, felt wonderful. She smiled in approval that she chose the brown mottled cloth that matched her thick, long coat. She'd look like a rock if she crouched. However, crouching had become difficult lately, and as she practiced, she kept toppling over. Grumbling, she said, "I would choose now to gain weight. When I need to be my fastest, I'm instead my dumpiest." She took the spare pair of breeches and tunic, dyed more gray than brown, folded them around several changes of undergarments, then shoved them into her bag. It'd been too many times that she'd packed for a move. Too many times she said goodbye to a house that she thought might be hers for more than a few moons. At least she was practiced at packing. Her bag was well balanced and well stocked. Although the emergency shelters were full, each person was to bring enough rations for at least a week, relying on the shelters only in cases of emergency. There to be enough true emergencies along the paths, the rector reminded their congregation that no family should create unnecessary problems by not being prepared. Their congregation had gathered one last time that morning, as soon as they saw the black banners with the white swords flying. They received last-minute instructions, and, after a prayer, the rector made sure everyone was taken care of, even and especially the Thorns. Versa looked around the tidy and airy bedroom, which had been hers, solely and completely, and no one else's ever, for the past 3 moons, and said a silent goodbye. She headed to the gathering room, where she knew her mother was waiting, but a deep and quiet voice startled her. She stopped and peered around the corner. Her mother was talking to a well-built man, maybe in his mid-50s, with light brown skin, graying hair, and gentle eyes. He was holding her mother's face. Versa clenched her fists until she realized that Drusus didn't seem to mind. In fact, she was turning a shade of pink. "Don't you dare think you're intruding, Drusus," the man was saying. "We've already discussed it, and there's no talking me out of it." "But, Creer, you need to take care of your own children." Creer chuckled softly. "My 6 boys have been married and on their own for a while now." He stepped closer to her. Versa gripped the door frame. She'd seen her mother and that man speaking on many occasions, and often he had walked her home from events at the rectory, but never had she seen him standing only inches away from her. "My boys know how lonely I've been, Drusus. My oldest son said to me this morning, 'We're taking Mrs. Thorne, aren't we? We've even made room for her daughters to ride in the wagon.' He said he's never seen me smiling so much since his mother died. And it's true, Drusus. You've made me smile again, and I'm not leaving without you and your girls." Versa's mouth dropped open as her mother sighed. It wasn't a sad sigh, but more of a girlish, giddy sigh. She was sure her mother had never made such a noise before. Drusus stepped closer to Creer, which Versa hadn't thought possible. "Only if you're sure this is the best thing." She didn't get to finish her sentence. Versa's eyes bulged as Creer tenderly kissed Drusus on the lips. Drusus seemed to be caught off guard and she stiffened, but suddenly her arms went around Creer and she kissed him back. Versa stared. Her mother kissing? Creer stepped back and beamed at Drusus. "I think this is the absolutely best thing." Drusus giggled. Versa didn't know if she should intervene or call a doctor. Creer took Drusus' hands and looked deep into her eyes. "1 hour, Drusus. I'll be here in 1 hour with my sons and their families. We'll have a pack horse for your things, and you'll be riding my horse all the way there." "Oh, Creer, I couldn't." "Yes, you can. I'll be leading him. He's big because he's a Clark, but he's steady." "No, I mean, I can't take your horse from—" "I can handle the walk. I've done it half a dozen times. My boys and I stocked those emergency caves ourselves. It's really a pleasant journey, but I worry about you. I don't want you tiring too quickly." You worry about me?" Creer stepped up to her again. "Of course I do. You're a remarkable woman, Drusus, and I want to take care of you. And he hesitated and blushed. "Well, I was hoping that maybe when all of this is over, whatever that might mean, that you'll consider—" Drusus put her finger on his lips. "Let's get through the next few days first. But I can tell you right now that I'm considering all kinds of things I never dared consider before." Creer caught her in another kiss, this time longer. Before he released her, he whispered, "1 hour." "1 hour," Drusus repeated as he pulled away. Creer grinned boyishly at her, then bounded out the front door. Drusus released a big sigh, wrapped her arms around herself, and spun like a schoolgirl until she saw her daughter standing in the doorway, hands on her hips. Oh, did you?" "I did. Mother, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I'm a 43-year-old woman who deserves to finally find some happiness." Versa scoffed. Don't you think this might not be the best time? Your husband is coming." "Ex-husband," Drusus reminded her. "Guide Zenas released us both from our marriages on the same day, although he said Lemuel stopped acting as my husband years ago. Or have you forgotten?" Versa growled quietly. "No, it's just that you were always the one to say, 'Don't trust men. They want only one thing.'" "Well, Creer already has 6 sons," Drusus giggled. "Now all he wants is me." "Mother!" "What?" Versa gestured wildly, baffled that her mother couldn't see the obvious. You're too old for this kind of nonsense." "Too old? I could live another 30 years, Versa, maybe even more, if I can have a wonderful man by my side." "And how can you be so sure he's a wonderful man, Mother?" "Because I feel it here," Drusus said, patting her chest. "Oh, I know what you're feeling," Versa sniggered. "You're far too flushed to feel anything else, but Ursula Thorne, don't you tell me what I should or should not be feeling. If I found a good man, then why can't you be happy for me? What ulterior motive could he possibly have?" Versa opened her mouth, then shut it. She couldn't think of another reason, except that maybe he was attracted to her. To Versa's surprise, Drusus began to chuckle. "Shocking, isn't it? That he might actually enjoy my company? We've been going to many events together. I haven't exactly been telling you about that. You seem content just sitting in here reading every book you and Delia can find. But Creer is a gentle man. His wife died almost 4 years ago, and last night he told me that while he could never replace her, his heart has room to grow new spaces. His wife will always occupy one part, but he said last night he was growing a new section, just for me. I think that's the lumberjack in him, comparing everything to new growth," she added dreamily. I had no idea, Mother." Versa was genuinely flabbergasted. "I didn't realize that I might want to fall in love again, see what a husband's supposed to be like. He's already shown more concern for me than Lemuel ever did in the 5 years we were together." Versa smiled. "You're right, I guess. But I must confess, seeing him kiss you—" Drusus flushed red with the memory. "Oh, Versa, he's so... This will be the longest hour of my life." Versa chuckled as her mother fanned herself. "Would you like me to find you a patch of snow to cool you down, young lady?" Drusus laughed. "No, I think I can control myself. I see you have your pack. Delia's ready too, but went down the road to check on that new mother. Mother, Versa interrupted carefully, I'm not going with you and your new boyfriend. Drusus paled. What? Versa put on a smiling face. Don't worry, I'm going to the ancient site. It's just that, well, I haven't been exactly forthcoming with you either. What do you mean? I'm not always staying here reading books when you sneak out to be with Creer. I've met someone too. Drusus clapped her hands in delight. Really? Versa nodded in embarrassment. Really? Who? I'm not sure you know him. He's in his early 20s and was visiting his grandparents in the next congregation over. We've only walked together a few times, and I don't even know if it will turn into anything, but, Drusus was nearly bursting. Well, I ran into him yesterday when I was getting supplies from the storehouse, and he said he'd like me to walk with him and his family to the ancient site. There's probably about 40 of them, so I'd be safe. Drusus clapped her hands again. Why, Versa, that's wonderful. Oh, I want to meet him. Mother, there's really no time. His grandmother isn't well, and his family won't be leaving until tomorrow morning. They're waiting for a special team of horses to arrive from Salem. She's frail and needs to ride in a net litter. Right now he's helping his cousin retrieve that team from the south. Oh, of course, Drusus said, disappointed. But I'll meet him up there, right? Maybe, Versa eyed her mother. As eager as you are, I don't really know if I want you scaring him. Don't worry, I'll be the very model of restraint. I'll wait for you at the temple site? Versa rolled her eyes. Mother, don't you think everyone will be meeting their families at the temple site? Well, I don't know of anywhere else to meet, she confessed. That's all I know that's up there. Versa tipped her head in agreement. Then I'll see you there. Only don't sit and wait for me. With my friend's grandmother doing so poorly, it could be even 2 days before we get there. But you'll be there? Drusus asked. What's that supposed to mean? Of course I'll be there. Versa exhaled in disgust. Where else would I go? An hour later, Versa was in front of her house waving goodbye to her mother and sister. Delia sat in a wagon between 2 younger girls, Creer's granddaughters, who were pelting her with questions about life and the world, which Delia happily answered. But Versa's attention was on Creer's sons, her potential step-brothers. She doubted that any of them knew their father had kissed her mother repeatedly. He'd come into the house alone to retrieve Drusus, greeted her with a kiss, received another kiss for his efforts, and so he gave one back as a thank you, and the pattern may have continued indefinitely had Versa not loudly cleared her throat, causing both Creer and Drusus to jump apart like startled teenagers. Now, as Creer led Drusus to his large gray horse and lifted her to the saddle, Versa hadn't realized how strong he was. Creer's sons smiled, and his daughters-in-law grinned in approval. Versa finally smiled as well. Her mother was in excellent hands. To her surprise, Creer came back to where she was standing in the doorway, the look in his eyes grave. I don't like leaving you here, Versa, but Drusus says you'll be traveling with another family? Yes, I'll be heading over to their house soon, and they'll leave in the morning. Creer gave her a calculated look, as if he didn't fully believe her. You be careful, and you take care of yourself, understand? Don't make your mother worry about you because she does, immensely. Now's not a good time for you to be alone, even for only an hour. Forgive me for saying this, but you aren't exactly in the best physical condition. Versa was taken aback. I'm fine, sir. I can take care of myself. I have for years. But that's not Salem's way, Versa. Let me leave one of my sons and his family here. They can keep you company and then go with you. No, sir, she cut him off, almost embarrassed by his concern. Creer hardly knew her, but he was acting as if he'd been in her family for years. Salem was odd that way. That's not necessary. I'll be going over to my friend's grandparents' house right after you leave. You just take care of my mother and sister, please. Creer smiled. I intend to, Versa. And you as well. If anything comes up, any problems, you send the word and I will come for you. Despite her efforts, Versa's chin quivered as she looked into his concerned face. Thank you. My mother thinks highly of you. And I her. Now, don't make your mother and me worry, he said, as if he already had some connection to her. To make matters worse, he gave her a quick kiss on the forehead, a fatherly gesture which so surprised her that she went rigid. Unaware of her astonishment, Creer walked back to his horse, took the reins, and nodded to the rest of the family, most on foot, several in the wagon until the trailhead, and a couple on horseback. He started west, with his family following and waving genially to Versa still standing on the doorstep. Drusus gave Versa one final wave, then turned and asked Creer something. Whatever he answered made Drusus laugh. Versa walked back into the house and blinked back her tears which she never let fall. She still felt that kiss on her forehead, and probably would for the rest of the day. Her mother would be well taken care of, and so would Delia. But Priscilla was, well, no one knew. Not even Guide Zenas could give them anything about her. That meant there was only one thorn still to attend to. Good thing she inherited his lying tongue. Versa went back to her room, slipped on her very full pack, picked up her mother's brown shawl, which Drusus insisted she take to her to be returned at the ancient site, and wrapped it around her head to cover her blonde braid. She nodded at her reflection in the mirror, left her room, and went out the back door. Then she started walking south. Now this view is even better, Cloudman exclaimed, as he was the third man to reach the ridge. Snarl was the fourth, and a moment later the rest of Shin's security team stood along with him and Teach, who had strained himself to the point of collapse to stay with the private. Teach now lay on the snow as if he'd passed out, or perhaps he was hoping he'd appear to be unconscious to avoid going any further. Yeah, great view. Sergeant Beavid leaned over to catch his breath and, Shin suspected, to avoid seeing just how high they were. It's got to be after midday meal, isn't it? Shin looked up at the sky. I'm thinking here would be a good place to camp for the night. It's a large area, and most of those on the mountainside should be able to reach here by dinner. What is this I'm hearing? A voice boomed over at him. Camp here? Why? General Thorne climbed the last few feet to the ridge. He was winded, his face was red, but his blue eyes simmered. We have the entire afternoon. Let the stragglers camp here. We go on. Twig, Healy, Amory, and many more soldiers, all looking as exhausted as the general, lumbered to the ridge next, stopping to look around and catch their breath. Shin gestured to them. Sir, I'm not sure how much further it is, and your men are obviously tired. Amory, Thorne called. How much further to that mountain valley, the place with the fort and the horses? Amory wiped away the sweaty hairs that clung to her face. Now that all the face paint had dripped off, she appeared wrinkled and haggard as she squinted into the distance, and Shin held his breath. She was going to notice. Why, Lemuel, we're nearly there. You see how those two peaks meet? That's at the end of the valley. Thorne looked in the direction Amory pointed. That's maybe less than 2 miles from here. Shin held his face perfectly still, because Thorne actually had that distance correct. So the beginning of the valley is less than 2 miles away? Thorne's voice grew tighter. Along this ridge? Amory nodded eagerly. Thorne aimed a sneer at Shin. Very good, son. You did something right today. Make all the men exhausted, then reward them with an easy walk to the mountain valley. We should have everyone there by nightfall. Sounds like a much better place for a camp. I understand there are hanging nets to sleep in. I may consider letting you have one tonight." Shin stiffened in frustration and fury. "I prefer sleeping under the stars. In fact, I may want to sleep out in the open every day for the rest of my life." "For however long that life is, Shin," the general said testily, "you may do so." Thorn turned to everyone else. 30 minutes rest, eat your rations, then we continue on." He smiled thinly at Shin. "In 2 miles, we'll see about giving you back your first name, but the last name will wait until we reach Salem." Bristling, Shin wisely said nothing. Instead, he took off his pack, sat down on a rock which was relatively dry, and pulled out his rations. As he nibbled on his hard bread, he fretted. Anyone could find their way to the glacial fort now. At least he'd given Salem more time to evacuate. Someone should have noticed their approach by now. He glanced over at Thorn, who was making Healy get out his rations, and he felt his stomach twist. More than anything in the world, he hated this man who told lie after lie. He hated how he had spoken about the weakness of Colonel Shin. A pang of guilt struck him. He had similar thoughts about Perrin Shin. Weak, useless, too scared to return to the world to take his name back from General Thorn. Finally, Shin understood. Of what worth was the opinion of the world? Wishing Thorn could feel the daggers he was shooting out of his eyes, he glanced again at the general, but noticed instead Healy standing nearby and holding Thorn's pack as well as his own. Pale and worn, Healy was the oldest man out here. Why wasn't someone else acting as Thorn's pack mule? Shin sagged. That's what he would have turned into had he stayed. Perrin Shin might have turned out as vile and selfish as Lemuel Thorn, but instead he fled the world. Thank the Creator you finally understand why I didn't want to go back to the world. But young Pear, you don't have to fix anything. There's a plan. No, Pugga, let me do something good for Salem. I can't go back like this. I have to go back to Mama and Papa having done something good. And that's the end of part 1 of 3 of chapter 3. Thank you.